Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in again on another one of these die-cast modifications cum restorations. This time around, it's a Corgi Mercedes-Benz 190E. So what can I say about this car then? This is another one of these ones that jumped to the top of the pile. The list is getting ever so long on projects that keep popping up in my mind, but as I rummage through the box again, something else jumps to the top of the list and everything goes to the back again. This one is no exception again, a bit like the Zaxpeed Capri that I did a few months ago. There's lots of potential in the casting, it looks really detailed. I made a bit of a comedy gaff on that one by saying, with its toy-like appearance of the wheels and the chassis, yes, they are all toys at the end of the day, so that was a bit of a silly comment I made, but I think you know what I mean. The wheels are all the generic-looking things typical of that era. Chassis are very plain with no detailing that you get in the modern-day cars. Well, even the old cars of back in the day, you'd still got a bit of an exhaust feature and all the rest of it, and they're just plain and rubbish looking if you ask me. Almost like Corgi had lost heart in the whole thing towards the end, well, that's what I think anyway. So I'll quickly jump on this then and do what I've done in the past. There is other videos that I've done on this with removing bodies and removing paint, so I won't go too detailed into that. I'll put the links in the description if you want to jump to it, but essentially this is everything that's inside. Again, this cheap base looking. The interior is pretty good actually. Headlight assemblies built into the windscreen, and then this body, pretty cool, pretty detailed, lots of nice clean lines in there. Not so fond of the colour of it, if I'm being brutally honest, but if you want to look at my video on how to remove paint, please jump in again. I'll put that link in the description so as not to bog this video down. But here we have the final body underneath, laid bare as it was. A little bit of corrosion here and there, a little bit of pitting, a little bit of manufacturing defects, not die cast, it's a die cast, which I'm just going to go over now and just brush it down a little bit. I'll use my little rotary tool with the wire wheel on again. As I've mentioned in other videos, if you put some eye protection on, because these little fine little pieces that fly off this, crikey, they end up everywhere. They appear days later in my pants after they've been in the wash. I don't quite know how they even get in there, but anyway, that's another story. So this time around, I'm going to use some lovely little aluminium wheels from a company called 164. I'll put them in the description on this video. They're on Facebook and you order them through Facebook, but essentially there's some fantastic little metal etch profile wheels in all sorts of different styles, and you get these fantastic machined, really accurate machined little wheels themselves, and you just essentially put the metal etch part onto these and you can deep dish them. They actually look pretty good like that with none of the actual wheel fascias put on them, but there's all sorts of replicas. I've got a couple of the Volkswagen T1 T2 type pickups and Porsche replica wheel ones and some other little styles for different projects coming up, and you get these fantastic little brake disc and caliper assemblies to go in there, which I'm not going to put on this one because the wheel fascia I'm putting on this for this project, you wouldn't really necessarily see it, but you can just see the lips now, the inner lips on these wheels. So essentially this one isn't a deep dish version. It'll sit just on that lip, which I'll glue in and show it to you later on. But really good little product as always, and none of these ones that I've been using in the past that are given to me, I pay for them, so I'm giving them a good thumbs up. They're not paying me to do this, it's stuff that I've just found as I've gone along. So What I'm going to do is rip this rear spoiler off by just grinding it down a little bit. Again, use some protection, everybody, so as not to hurt yourselves, but I'm just going to tickle this one along and take my time on it, because if I use the big wheel like I've done on the other projects, it'll be like a hot knife through butter. It'll be like a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It'll just fly through it too quick. So I'm just taking my time just to take it right down flush with the boot lid, because there's obviously, as you've seen the thumbnail, this is going to be a DTM version, so I'm going to make a big Evo 1 type rear wing, which I'll do later on. But that's it removed. I'll clean that up a little bit later on as I go along, but nice and flush sitting. So for this one, I'm going to do these little arches that go on the Evo 1s, Evo 2s, and all the silhouette type cars that they almost were, I suppose, back in the day. And it was a great series, the German touring cars, arguably one of the best series that ever was, ever is, should I say. So it was something a little bit different. I haven't seen anybody do this. That's the reason why I went with this. So I'm using this EPO putty to create some wheel arches. Part of it's a resin, part of it's a hardener. You mix 2 equal parts together. Use different knives. In the past, it kept going a little bit funny when I was sealing them afterwards, and somebody pointed out I was using the same knife and actually you're contaminating and putting them together. So you use 2 little separate knives. It's obvious, sounds obvious saying it out loud now, but you know, sometimes the obvious things staring you in the face don't always appear. So mix them equally together. You have got a bit of time for this to go off. It does say it starts to at least skin over within half an hour and it's hard within 2.5, but I leave it a little bit longer than that. But you've got plenty of time now just to pat it around the car. And on this particular one, I'm not going to line the arches. You can line the arches with an aluminium can or another piece of plastic, just so you haven't got to mess around too much filing the inner part of it. But for this one, I'm not going to do that. I'm just simply going to work my way around it, wet my fingers now and again just to profile it. By the time you've done all 4, it's not getting hard at this stage, but it's starting to skin over a little bit. It's not quite as tacky, so you can do a little bit of shaping before it starts to go too hard. It just speeds up the process for later on, really. So I'm just quickly cutting into it. And whilst I've got a little bit left, because I always, even though I think I'm mixing a little amount and I'm not going to waste a lot, I do. So for this one, one thing I haven't done and showed everybody on these videos is just make some wing mirrors. So I'll put them to one side and let it all dry for now. So going on to this cheap and cheerful toy-like chassis. It is a toy. Stop saying it. It needs to have a new one. Bit like on the Ford, on the Zaxby Capri that I did, it was slightly off anyway on one side of these wheels. It didn't sit completely square in the arch. It's sitting a bit too far to the rear, so it was sort of out of sync anyway. So I'll chuck that over and start again, I think, and build up a new chassis and interior on it. So before I do, I'll just quickly glue these new wheels, or the fascia, the trim of it, to the inside of the rim, and I'll just put a little blob in, tickle it around with a cocktail stick, and then once you've cut all the little burrs off, and it's important to use a knife or a little pair of scissors to cut these out. Don't be tempted to twist these little parts out, because they will bend and distort and then you've wasted all your money. So take time. You will get some very fine little burrs. You can either cut them off again with a knife or use a little modelling file or a nail file just to get them off so it sits in flush. So I'll crack on and make the chassis now. I have done a longer tutorial on this, and one of the Styrene Diaries, which in fact I haven't done any more Styrene Diaries episodes, so I think I better crack on and do one. But essentially that's a long-winded how to make a chassis or interior from start, but same sort of process. Draw over the existing ones, start to trim it out so it's more or less a mirror image of the flat base of it. I'll quickly jump back to these wheels now they've had time for the glue to set, and just put these rubber tyres on. I've got real rubber tyres, so again adds to the detail to the process. And what I have found is they are a little bit tight. It may be how I've cut the axles and just the end of the axles have flared out a little bit, so I could probably have filed the axle down actually more than go to the trouble of opening up these holes. But essentially what I'm going to do now is go through my little offcuts again of this styrene stuff, and again I'll put the links in the description. I use the Evergreens, there is other brands, and put a little rolling tube and bond it to the chassis. But before I do that, I'll just mark out exactly where the center is this time. As I said, one of the main reasons why I'm doing this is because it was slightly out of sync, so I'll just mark up roughly where I want it to go. And then by using some small little U channel or C channel, whichever way you want to look at it, and then mounting the tube section to that, just gives it more sides, more purchase for it to glue down to, or bond down to should I say, and then put them all together. You do have a little bit of time when you do put your first piece of the mech, the little Ethel down. If you're wondering what I mean by that, again watch these little Styrene Diaries. It explain about all the tools and the equipment and the solution that you need. But when you do that little process there by licking it on, you have got a little time like I'm doing now just to maneuver it round. It will bond pretty much within seconds, but you have got a very small, relatively quick window just to shift it around a little bit if it's not completely accurate, completely lined up, if you know what I mean. But as straightforward and simple as that, you've got pretty much a rolling chassis with essentially three parts: a flat sheet, a C or a U section, and some tube. And as I've said in other videos, these are still offcuts I'm using that I'm just taking years for me to get through, so it's not costing me a great deal to make these things. And already at least we've got a lined up wheelbase this time round, so a little bit more work to do obviously to make it look nice. But what I'll do is I'll get cracking now with this body panel, body lines. Now it's dried off and gone hard. I have actually left this 24 hours now. As I said, you can start to do this process within 2.5, it does state, but I've done that in the past and it's a bit like chewing gum. Once you get off this harder surface, it's still quite tacky in the middle, so I've left it 24 hours. It's actually used for aquariums, for sticking down bits of rock and stuff under, well, whilst it's still obviously underwater. So once you've mixed it together, it will pretty much stick to anything, and sort of in any environment really. It's pretty cool stuff. So I'm using my little dental scriber just to keep adding lines as I go through this process, just so it does mimic it realistically by putting some body panel shut lines in there. And as you can see as well, you can use a knife to sculpt it. Really good stuff. Again, you can let your mind run wild with imagination of the parts and the body kits you can make. But essentially that is one side done. I like to put more on and sand it away, that way you're not adding stuff later on. It's better to take it down than to not put enough on it to start with. But as you can see by looking at it, it does look like a scene out of Narcos now once you start sanding it down. So here we have the little wing mirrors. Same process again. Once it's dried off, hold it in a pair of pliers and sand away and create some dinky little mirrors to go on the side. I'm just going to roll the inner arches back as well now, only ever so slightly. The wheels are catching the inside of the arches, so I think with the little cheap plastic ones are quite narrow, so it got away with it. If I put them too far inside, then the body kit hangs over too much, so it's got to sit at least right. Not necessarily flush with the new arches that I've done, but it does still need to have a little bit of clearance so it can roll somewhat. So I'm going to keep the dashboard. Seems senseless not to use the steering wheel and at least the texture of that dashboard top, but I'm going to ditch the interior, and all I'm going to do is start to work around the interior of it now. Again, there is another video on this. I will put the link in the description below. A little bit like using Lego or Meccano, just keep adding little pieces and building it up and building it up. Once the body is back on the chassis, you don't get to see some of this. I appreciate that, but I know it's there, but it does make it that little bit more scale replica, if you like. Using this fantastic little 1/64 scale seat from edition 6 again. As I've been saying throughout this video, I will put the link to this as well in the description. Great little products. It's got a few different styles now and some other little things like little NOS bottles, fire extinguisher bottles. So I think some brake discs and caliper replicas I think as well. So give them a look. Great stuff. Great little addition to your cars. And all I'm adding now is the rear sort of seat and parcel shelf assembly for a saloon car. It's important to keep putting it together and offering it up like I keep showing you now, because you can get carried away and all of a sudden things don't align up and you've gone too far down. As I've shown with this, important to put the windscreen assembly in as well. I've done that in the past when I've come to do roll bars and other little pieces inside the car that may foul against the body, and I haven't put the windscreen and glass assembly in, and before you know it, you put it back together and it doesn't fit. So yeah, learn from my silly mistakes. Just adding a little bit of detail, if you like, to some of the sort of ribbed metal assemblies for the rear, or what would be the seat and rear seat platform on the car. You know, if you've ever taken car interiors apart or looked at the body in white, the bare shells of a car, if you like, you'll see all sort of ribbed and top hat sections of parts of panels to give it extra strength. So it's just replicating something like that, really. Not rocket science, but just something to add a little bit of detail. And here's the rear, front to rear tunnel where the prop shaft would go underneath. Obviously I haven't gone to too much detail to make it prop shaft underneath, but little cut up pieces of the same section to make parts of the dashboard and some little buttons and switches to go over the console of the little race console and dash parts. So here it pretty much is in a basic form. I'm gonna quickly now add a roll cage. I'm using one of the thinnest pieces now. I think it looks quite scale. I've tried using ones the next size up and I think it just looks a little bit too chunky. It doesn't look very real. So this stuff, you don't really need heat. If you're gentle enough with it, you can bend it round without breaking it. So quite easy to use. It's fiddly at this point trying to get it to stick. Sort of using the bonding agent, the mech with one hand and trying to balance it with the other. If you've had a cup of coffee beforehand, you'll be shaking like well, yeah, you'll be shaking like hell. So it's a little bit fiddly at this point. I'm just whizzing through it just for a bit of continuity of the build. But as you can see, sometimes it'll grab first time, sometimes it just might take a few extra seconds just to stick down. But there you go, there's the full sort of scratch built chassis and interior now. It's a little bit odd, this one, the glass, well, the plastic, the windscreen assembly was a little bit chunky, so the roll bar does sit a little bit far down for my liking, but it's a compromise is what you had to do. So I'm just making the rear evo wing for this. So it's 4 parts, the base, 2 sides and a top, all stuck together. I've just gone off reference photos again for this, but like with all my projects, I always look at Pinterest as my main source more than anything, just so I can keep it all together. But Google searches images and just have a good look around for ideas, and I've noticed this sort of spoiler on these Evo models have these like little fins sticking out at the back on the lower part, which when you're building it like this, it looks a bit odd and you think, what's he doing? But if you look at the actual pictures of the GTM cars from sort of 1990, 1992 sort of era, they did have this little teeth, this little fin hanging out the back. So there you go, that's why I've done that. Little bit fiddly again, but a little bit of patience does pay dividends in the back when it's all completed. And just finally just rounding off the tops just to make it look like it is one piece and it's not all stuck together. So just gently does it, it looks pretty good. So the final part of this assembly, well actually no, second to final part of this assembly is these little side mirrors made out of paper clips and some of that EPO putty. It's got enough space on the original casting to put a little hole in the side, and what you'll find is it'll fit just nicely. And I've done it this way because I've done it in the past where I've put the mirrors on and then I've tried to sand afterwards, and you just haven't got enough space to work around sanding them down. So by making them first then gluing them second, it just works better for me. So I'm going to lay a bit of primer down on this before I start painting and masking off, and as per the thumbnail you've already seen what I've done. What I originally was planning for was the Sonax version, and I went all the way down the line designing the decals, and then it suddenly hit me, with it being a black car, all that effort I've put into the interior is just going to be hidden. You're going to lose everything. So begrudgingly, I was nearly at the end of it, and then I suddenly thought, you know what, I'm going to change tact and look for a lighter colour. So the one that I liked the most was this Parcel one. Quite basic in its appearance and looks until I started doing the decals and the paint, and it actually has come out pretty good, and I am happy with it. I've always got room to criticise my own models, so there's things I could have done different, could have done better, but in an ideal world, if I hadn't have gone to that effort on all the interior, I probably would have done the Sonex one. It was a little bit more complex than putting it together, but hey ho, I can do that for another one at a later date. And all I'm using is a little bit of Microsol, which is a little bit of an agent to help soften the decals, draw it into the body lines and help with adhesion and all that. So I put a little bit on before and a little bit on afterwards. Yeah, I'm just brushing a little bit on afterwards, and it just sort of melts. Well, no, it doesn't melt it. It sort of draws the decals really into the body lines, so it doesn't stand off, and it almost looks like you've painted it by hand. It's sprayed on. It's great stuff. Again, that little tube of sort of 50mm has lasted me forever. So quickly go around and paint some details now. I always use the Tamiya X paints and XF paints, sort of the matte paints and the gloss paints. Acrylics, I always use a toothpick to stir them in and then use the toothpick to get the paint off the bottom, because all the oil sits to the top and the paint sits to the bottom, spending hours and hours. Well, it's not hours, I know it's minutes, but mixing them all up, it's quicker just to mix it a little bit, dip it up, use the toothpick to get some of the decent paint out of the bottom. The final bit therefore, before showing you the final car, is some little bit of vinyl sticker cut to strips to make some seat belts. So here is what we started off with. Rather plain, rather bland looking car, but plenty of potential. And the final unveiling, my take on Mercedes 190E DTM cars from the German touring car series. Turned out okay. Probably would have loved to have seen the Sonex, but again, it's something I can do on another car. Really like the wheels. I will be using plenty of these. Well, I've got plenty of different styles to use, so I will use them on other cars. Body kit sits quite nice. Does look kind of OE. Original equipment. It looks okay. I hope, as always, you've liked my take on my little customs, my little modifications. Hope you'll stick around for more future ones. Thanks, as always, for watching, everybody. Take it easy. You can hear everybody shouting in the background, mate. Has your brother been naughty or something?
No, he's not doing his own work, neither am I, but yeah.
Right, I'll do that first layer.
That stinks. Oh, actually no, it smells like
You should have a mask on, mate.
Well, you don't.
Come on, get
You're the one who's actually doing it.
Stop it.